This is the second of our In Conversation with Journalists series. It should really be called In Conversation with Editors, but of course, both Mapi and Angie were journalists before they were editors, and I've never met a journalist who hasn't at some stage said, you never stop being a journalist. An editor is just a super journalist. To the Climate Health Story Project people, so that's the second in our series, and we're really going to focus on audio and video today. You could see it as radio and television, or you could see it as podcast and TikTok video. The principles are actually quite similar, except, of course, the platforms are different. Both the newsrooms that Angie and Mapi work for have very rigorous editorial standards, and that's not always the case with podcasts and TikTok, but it can be the case. And some of you may be producing something in that regard as well. It's how to use your voice and your face, and how to, use the spoken word to get the message across. So it's a topic really close to my heart, because as a journalist, I've in the past actually mainly worked in broadcast. And I'll also tell you that I've worked with both Mapi and Angie, and that goes back 20, 30 years in both cases. And in both cases, I knew that at some stage, both of them would be in the really senior positions that they are in now. So I'm very, very excited to have them both with us today. And to Mapi and Angie, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about those on the call. Ntando Yola is somebody who has worked extensively in HIV prevention and other fields of, medical science in general. He works for the Desmond Tutu Foundation and is an expert at getting people to buy into science, even people who previously don't have a BSc or haven't studied science, people who participate in trials, really just an expert bridge between the science and the community, as one sometimes puts it. Marlies Craig is an epidemiologist. She has a huge interest in insects, actually, among other things. And she actually calls herself a biophile, which I really love, love of everything in biology. James Earlam. Oh, thanks, James. I didn't see you join. James, I want to ask you to describe what you do in a minute. You're a climatologist primarily. Actually, I do know. James is a climatologist, and he also works really closely with civil society in terms of, communicating this and doing this important work. Nomfundo Mhlangeni is with the South African Medical Research Council, is an expert in water type issues, phytotechnology, analysis of the purity of water, what pathogens may be in the water that are harmful to the environment and to humans. And Nomfundo, I know that your expertise really would come in so usefully in terms of stories that journalists want to pursue. And King, or we just all call him King, Luther King, is also a researcher, and his field of expertise is antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. He's a very prolific publisher and communicator. Writes often for In Conversation, and is a very good communicator. Well, everybody on the call is a good communicator, but we're really here to learn how to communicate specifically for radio and television. And I'm going to quickly tell you a little bit more about Mapi and Angie now. So Mapi Mhlangu and I have worked together since the early 90s. Well, we did start working together in the early 90s when Mapi was a young journalist, a brilliant journalist, and Mapi is the executive, let me not get it wrong, the editor-in-chief of Newsroom Africa. She has worked in broadcast in many, many different iterations, and at more than three. Mapi, you'll tell us more about that, different platforms of television broadcast. And Angie Kapelianis and I have also worked together in the past at the SABC, also worked in different iteration, but always in radio. At Mapi, I'm not sure if you worked in radio apart from TV ever. Oh, you have worked in radio. Okay, great. Angie has worked mainly in radio, or only in radio, I think. and is now it's a beautiful title. Um, she leads digital audiovisual work at SABC News. In the process of today, I would actually, through the course of this discussion, I'd love for you both to tell us a little more about what your work entails as well. But okay, so that's enough about introductions. I want to ask you, Mapi, what do scientists or people who communicate science most often get wrong when they appear on a TV show?
Thanks, Ida, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I think what scientists mostly get wrong is the use of jargon. I think they are highly intelligent people who have spent years studying these issues, and sometimes they come across as little impatient when they are being interviewed by someone who have not even read the executive summary of their research. I think sometimes scientists don't use enough analogies and visual language to take the viewer through what they're saying. I think they tend to fight the question. If the question is too pedestrian, you can see the agitation instead of just bridging back to the core messages that they've decided. And some don't really care much about how they look. Television is a visual medium. So if your hair or your bed is over empowering, the person end up just being distracted by either what you're wearing and how you're looking like. So it is a visual medium, and how you look and your body language is important. And I don't think they assume that they will be edited, particularly when they're on TV. Sometimes they want to go and explain in a way that doesn't say, this is the input, and only explain further. Now, I think that is very important because how the editors cut bites after the interview, they barely listen to the entire interview. They cut the first response. So the first response must be input, must be the key message that you want, and then the caveat, if you might include the caveat. So I think I would say those are the key things where you have done so much, you are very passionate about this work, and you haven't made an attempt to actually uh, use layman language, not dumb it down, but use layman language in a way that people who doesn't understand science, people whose first interaction with science is on social media, that person understand what you're talking about. And secondly, and I've listened to like different scientists being interviewed, whether on radio or on television, and I do understand their annoyance because these mediums that are like 24-hour factory producing news, not all presenters are well read. Not all presenters will be able to tease out the most interesting part of your interview because they are seeing your story for the first time that day. So they haven't immersed themselves in the work or the previous work that has been done. So I think sometimes scientists lack the generosity of spirit to understand that they are dealing with people who are generalists, who are not necessarily scientists, and therefore you need to guide the conversation. If the question is out of the way, don't fight it, bridge back to the key message that you are in studio or you are where you are to talk about.
Thank you so much, Mapi. I saw you nodding a lot, Angie. I'm sure in thinking about today, you were thinking to yourself, what's the key idea that you would really like to bring across? So, what is that key idea? If somebody had to take away one, nugget to cling onto for today, what would that be?
Share your passion. So you're the expert, you're the scientist, you have studied this for years, you know your subject better than anyone. To Mapi's reference, we were actually bemoaning yesterday when we just had a quick catch up. We grew up on a diet of beats, the police beat, the criminal beat, the health beat, science, politics. All of that in this day and age has disappeared. I do want to blame, if I must apportion blame to anyone, probably live TV and never-ending 24/7 social media, doom scrolling. There isn't enough time. So where we grew up, I grew up, for example, I started working in 1989 as Namibia was going towards independence and democracy. I'd come from Rhodes University. I wanted to do politics. It was a big international story for us. And if you know the politics and the history of kind of the Southern African region, and my general editor gave me 7 beats. Now, it might seem like nothing, 7 beats in a little country, but it was ranging from water to conservation to art. And all I wanted to do was politics. And I was allowed to do politics on condition I did my 7 other beats. So I worked the contacts, even if it was one sentence, even if it was making contact with people, reading. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have social media then. We had to read, do our research differently. But I'm just giving you a little bit of kind of like background of how the world has evolved so much. But you're the experts. You're passionate about what you studied. Do you want to share it? Why do you want to share it? And then critically important is, how do you share that? I would want to argue that news is news, but you need to know, excuse me, the strengths and the weaknesses or shortcomings of each medium. So radio has strengths that TV doesn't have. TV has strengths that radio doesn't have. Social media, TikTok, website, they all have different strengths. And I think if you're passionate about what you do and you want to share that, and I would hope you do, it's become familiar with the different kind of platforms. And one of the easiest ways of advice that I could give is, what is it that you like? I love my reels. I'm not a TV person. I'm a radio person who had to learn to tell the story visually on radio with only audio and my words. But I love my reels. Why is it that a 5-second, 10-second, 15-second reel can move me and others don't move me? So the principles are generally the same, but what is it that you like about good writing? Is it short and crisp writing? Where's the main point? Where do they substantiate? Be it literature, be it poetry. So use yourself as your kind of own kind of barometer. What do you like? What is effective and resonates with you? Those are just some ideas, generally.
That's great, Angie. Mapi, Angie just in a sense blamed live ongoing 24-hour television for this phenomenon. And so I was wondering, what do you think of that? Do you take the blame? And what is the strength of live 24-hour television, which you've worked in often?
I think guilty as charged, but I think the strength of 24-hour news, just because there's high probability of having to deal with BCCSA, we take a little bit of time in putting something on air, and that's why people would say, but I haven't seen it on TV, because in TV you can see. So if people are saying people are dying because of vaccine, in TV you cannot do that story without showing at least a tombstone or without speaking to a family that have lost someone. So it does have that capacity to show and tell. So that's one of the biggest strengths. Of course, as I indicated, because of all other opportunities, when you're in TV, you get seen, and a lot more people tend to gravitate towards you. We lost a lot of good talent of people who are well-read because then now they get called to be MCs. We've lost a lot of good journalists in the business of being MCs. So as a result, the talent that is on TV, because it's so flamboyant, it's also is putting up a show. We have people who might not be we have performance over substance sometimes. So we get these people on television who are great in terms of telling the story, reading also cue, just like easy way of like making a connection with the viewer at home. But that person might not be well read. And because that person is on air for 3 hours, it's always sometimes with a few interviews, and that person get to prepare maybe for 3 or 4 interviews, and if there's other story that breaks, that person needs to wing it. So you are unlikely one morning you are set up on Wednesday and you come to an interview on Friday and you go with an anchor who probably has only just do chat GP for questions, and this anchor is not even listening to what it's saying, sticking to the questions that were done for them because they haven't immersed themselves on the subject. Hence, I say if you encounter such a problem where a person is not hearing you, is moving the interview to another direction, and you know your core themes and your what is important, the 5 things that you want viewers to get out of that interview. That's why I'm saying you need the ability to be able to bridge, acknowledge the question, but go to what is important. Because once they get embarrassed, also they tend to be slightly aggressive. So without embarrassing the person who's doing that, that is not an excuse for the lack of reading. But the reality, I would be lying if I say everybody who has a microphone on television is well read. I know this is my biggest frustration. So I need you to go there knowing that. And secondly, when it comes to TV, we use sound bites. Unfortunately, long ramble answers have no space on television. So if you haven't captured your audience or if you haven't shared your core message in 30 seconds, chances are of that going to edit, being part of the story in the evening are limited because packages don't accommodate 1 minute long sound bites. The sound bites will be 10, at most 30 minutes if it's a complex, 30 seconds if it's a complex subject. So that is another sort of weakness of television that you must then have in mind. And one of the things with television, I indicated earlier, is show and tell. It's great if you are preparing for a television interview to say, to the producer that contact you for the interview, I actually have graphics or there is video that you can use and overlay to explain what I'm saying to you. So that helps and it amplifies your story better when people can see what you're talking about, because as we know, science is often quite complex and use terminology that sometimes is difficult for the ordinary viewer to imagine and picture them in their mind. So it helps when the picture is in the form of graphic or whatever is taken from the lamp. It just creates, it goes well hand in hand with whatever explanation you're doing for the interview. So I've spoken about the fact that there's an interview, you get an opportunity. In most cases, scientists hardly get, unless it's a big story, hardly get invited to be in studio for a 5 minutes interview. They are normally part of a package. So a reporter will go to you and they will say to you, we are doing a story on water crisis in South Africa. We just want to know why is the water quality deteriorating. You must always know that out of that interview, if the reporters already say they are doing a feature piece, you are lucky if they use more than a minute of what to say. So you need to be very clear what it is and probe the reporter so that you know exactly what to give them instead of giving them a long interview that will go 10 minutes interview, they will take 30-second bites. So it's very important to understand the medium and actually speak to the reporter that what do you have so far? Who have you spoken to? What are they telling so that your input is relevant? You don't, and not a lot of reporters prepare well in terms of that. But I think when someone is saying they're doing a feature, it is very important to say, what else are you doing in this feature? what other voices are you getting, so that you don't waste your time. And sometimes you need to be that generous as before the camera rolls, so that you give them context. But once they say, okay, let's record, you really need to get into that soundbite mode. That how do I say what I need to say in 30 seconds at most?
Yeah. Mapi, that is fascinating. I think in a nutshell, what I hear you say is take charge and be generous. And I see you nodding, Angie, and for a question for either of you, whoever wants to jump in, is in terms of being proactively engaging with either an amorphous big station, because you might not know who's doing the story, or actually being proactive with a journalist who has approached you for this appearance in a package. How would a journalist in your newsroom or you as editors respond if a scientist actually said, look, I've got the following questions to recommend? Because you spoke about they're going off course with a question. I know journalists are quite protective and say, we don't want to share the questions in advance. We want you to be spontaneous, but also often in a more investigative story, we don't want you to, we want to put you on a spot actually through a question. But often in science, it's really about sharing information and ensuring that it's accurate. I mean, often there isn't necessarily a controversy, but about being accurate. So how would you have, as practicing journalists or now as editors, respond to a scientist saying, look, here are the questions, these are the questions that I really think you should be asking?
So I think I'll start with that. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, Mapi, if I can just start with that one. So I think the starting point for me is not in advising the questions. You can't even begin. I mean, that's if a journalist or let's say a radio station or an anchor reaches out to you. But do you know who the journalists are? Do you know who's doing what? And it starts by reaching out. So let's take, for example, we know we have the annual seasonal, Western Cape fires. But what do? We do the water bombing. We maybe show the visuals of the helicopters, who set the fire, who set the felt or the unique flora on fire, and what else? I mean, and that's where the story generally stops and starts, putting out fires. Look at the recent Kruger National Park flooding. I mean, they're calling it the Great Flood of the Kruger National Park. In a few days, I mean, parts of the Kruger National Park were underwater. So the first priority would be get the people out, get the animals out. And then I'm not sure, I was on leave, I'm not sure if we ever bothered to look at the next leg of the story, which I think would possibly talk to the climate health aspect. Who among you was sitting on information? Did you reach out? So it's even before someone phones you up for an interview and you want to kind of help shape and guide the questions. Do the reaching out. I get inundated with emails, but there are many other ways to reach people. Some of you work for organizations. Organize a media networking session, just a chat or whatever. And as I said, I think right at the beginning, is we've lost the beats. We've lost the beat system. And with that, there's a huge, huge gap. I mean, Becky Cisa, for example, is one of the few, the ability of a news organization to focus very, very specifically. Many don't have that luxury. So I think it starts by reaching out. If somebody, as a journalist, I would take offense as a journalist if somebody had to give me questions. And we get a lot of email PR puff stuff where they're already suggesting the questions like, so-and-so is available for an interview. These are the questions you can ask. I get highly irritated because actually you are underestimating me. So we have kind of key guidelines. Curiosity is number one. It doesn't even feature probably in the rules of journalism. But for example, we talk about the 5 W's and the 1 H, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And if we covered those, we're more or less covered. But the why and the how are critically important. So I would take offense if somebody had to give me the questions. I would not take offense if you had discovered something phenomenal that you wanted to share. So it's by passion and curiosity. Who do you want to share it with? Why do you want to share it? Why do you care? Why should I care? These are all questions that we're asking ourselves. But I wouldn't take offense if we had like if there was time for a pre-conversation or pre-interview and we had to have a little discussion. In preparing for meeting you online and your faces we still haven't seen, last night I also went to have a look at the who's who among you. Ida had mentioned that maybe not all of the team would be there or participants, so I didn't focus too much on the who. I went to look at, oh my God, what's an epidemiologist? Oh God, I know nothing about epidemiology. I better go and have a look at it. And then in my Google search, it was, what was it, a disease detective? And if I'm right, there's something that you can already begin to play on there. I mean, that's just getting to know the field, whether it's meteorology or the antimicrobial resistance. These are things that we know nothing about, but I would expect a journalist to do their homework, to figure out why they want to do the interview, what story they want to tell, not to know everything, but in asking their questions, that's how you begin to guide them as well. Focus, listen to what they have to ask, but at the same time, what is it that you want to share with them and ultimately the world and the public? So I would take offense if somebody had to give me a list of questions, and it has happened and people still continue to do it. And I'll say, thank you very much. We can have a conversation, but I'm not going to interview so-and-so based on your set of questions. And often there's an intention behind that, depending on who it comes from, and to be able to read through that. But if you're wanting to help me and guide me and tell me, why is this important? You have to understand the why, and then how do you communicate that to me? Because all I am is really the conduit to the public and the world. That's really who I am as the journalist.
Thanks for that. What is your take on that, Mapi?
For me, I think not as part of the press release, but there is value in having pre-interview. In fact, I can see an interview where there was no pre-interview. Because it's disjointed. So pre-interview, not necessarily with an anchor, pre-interview with whoever is asking you to come on. Once a person has decided that, oh, they like the press release that you have issued and they want to speak to you, I think understand why, because sometimes the producers just send a WhatsApp saying, we want to speak to you in relation to the fire that are happening in Cape Town. Have that interview, have that kind of communication. What exactly do you want me to focus on the fire? I think that we become more richer and we empower viewers more if that conversation happens before the interview, then go to an interview, and particularly because TV as well, we have limited time, and then we do an ABC from the onset, where an ABC is actually not the issue. The issue is impact, why what is happening now. So I'm a great believer in pre-interviews. Secondly, you ask about being proactive. I mean, I'll give you one example that is perfect. We recently got it wrong on a water story where we used an old, discredited way of testing the validity of water in the Eastern Cape. And one scientist that we often speak to really just shoot a WhatsApp after he saw that and said, guys, this is wrong. This is why it's wrong. And we were able to, within a space of an hour after that was done on, I think 2 hours after it was done on air, we were able to bring another person who said, what we have just done on air is wrong, because for us, our reputation matter. So what we have just done on air, to a certain extent, it does test the water, but it's not valid because this is what needed to be included when you're testing. So in our world where South Africa has been caught with a lot of so-called experts who are flamboyant, who sells themselves to producers and are always available. And, it happened at the height of load shedding, where suddenly people who were politicians, who were pushed by companies who were trying to get money from government, were becoming commentators and authority. And it happened for months until some of the experts said, but why are you calling these guys from experts? Have you done the proper work that makes them an expert in this subject? So a lot, because of our need to fill the airtime, there are a lot of check and balances that sometimes we miss because people who are invested in misinformation, they're very sophisticated. It's a well-funded initiative, and they will create this website. Now if someone says, and you go to their website and you realize, oh, it's still under construction. No, I can't go to them. But that kind of due diligence is not done often. And often in our media platform, there are people who speak about science with such authority and they have no business doing that. So being proactive is also protecting your profession and calling things out. And how you call it things out, some of you are attached to companies that have media organizations. So we were contacted by a PR person from that organization who said, no, I have a specialist who said what we have just done is wrong. This is why it's wrong. So that does help, because we are in this battle for a misinformation that is sometimes deliberately because people have interest. So I will say do that. But if you're going to be interviewed for a package, when a reporter comes to you for an interview, have a chat, say, oh, let's not record now. Let's just have a chat. I want to know what exactly you want to get so that I can frame it into a soundbite. They will really appreciate you being upfront to say, I want us to have a conversation first so that I can frame what you're looking for into a soundbite. They will appreciate that if there are television reporters. If, some of you are going to be called in with State of the Nation address to think about, are we investing enough on science given the kind of challenges that come with climate? So, if again you have a PR company and you are interested to talk about what it takes to build a country like ours, because we have a great reputation when it comes to research, but why we need to, despite of the fiscal cliff that we might be going through, we still need to invest on research. That's where you raise your hand to say, Sona, sometimes the president doesn't mention this, but in order for us to develop a vaccine for HIV/AIDS, you need investment. We cannot only be dependent to pharmaceutical companies. Some of this investment needs to come from government. One of the examples that there's a great debate that is currently happening between the DA and ANC, GNU partners over DA claims that they've developed a vaccine in 18 months, a vaccine for foot and mouth disease. Now, you guys are in a position, you know how long it takes to develop a vaccine. And if you can't develop a vaccine in 18 months, someone is going to come and look for science to say, is it true? Can someone develop a vaccine in 18 months? You need to explain those processes because people don't know those processes.
That's very encouraging and fascinating. And I actually wanted to very soon turn it over to those on the call to also ask any follow-up questions they may have. But I just have one that I do want to get in before turning it over to all of you, the others on the call, is what if somebody was listening now and said, oh my goodness, you've got to be flamboyant, it's hard work, you've got to be proactive, then only 1 minute is used. And what if somebody came to the conclusion, and a scientist on the call perhaps, saying, it's not worth my while, my science can't be explained in 1 minute. I don't have time to be proactive. I am not flamboyant by nature. What if scientists somehow just said, look, it's just not worth my while? What would be the impact of that?
It'd be devastating, because they would be sitting with information that they could share. And as I said, it goes beyond and through us. That's not shared to make a better informed citizenry, world society that contributes to conversations, understanding. And I want to say that it seems a lot for a little. So if I were a scientist, I don't know, I like the disease detective. I don't know that I'd be good at it, the epidemiologist. Have a look what people are doing with podcasts. You could have your own podcast. You could make it available to us. That's why I was saying, see what's working, what resonates with you as a human being, a scientist, that others around the world are doing. I follow a lot, reputable on social media. I'm not active. I'm the watcher. I see someone great, um, journalism studies, institutes. I follow, but I'm not active. But if I had to do it, I could also, I don't know, it would take a lot for me to do a TikTok. But there's some people who've never had experience in audiovisual, in conveying a message, and look how phenomenally well they're doing. They're doing their little TikToks, they're doing their podcasts, and podcasts are no longer, just this radio audio conversation that's happening while everyone is multitasking. The format for TV has actually taken, it's not this obsession with blocks and just one block and what have you. It's actually the conversational audio, radio, intimate format where people are having conversations with each other. They've now got their mics and their headphones and sitting across a table. So it's gone to the intimate. But that is not too difficult to do. So you could start it for yourself. When you get the hang of it and you're happy with it, you could then share it. I mean, we can use content from Conversation Africa. I'm not sure. They've also got the USA version in Australia, Groundwork, Becky Caesar. So you could do what you do in a way you're controlling it and then make it available. But be comfortable, learn to become comfortable with conveying your message, your excitement, your passion, your discovery, your science. I think the world would be poorer not knowing. But there are great ways and great techniques through all of us, the traditional news media and non-traditional news media, that you can share your passion and discovery and expertise.
Love that. Thank you. Okay, so let's hear if any of you, James, King, Tando, Marlies, Nomfundo, if any of you have questions for Mapi and Angie. Love to hear your questions. See, you've
Yes,
typed
thank you
something.
very much.
Yeah, James, great.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Mapi. Thank you, Ida, for facilitating this and for those great pearls of wisdom from long experience. My question there was about how can we better combat climate doom scrolling, and I'm sure there's a lot of that, and that tends to sort of switch people off even talking about climate change, maybe, and to really promote stories that create hope and promote public advocacy for realizing the co-benefits, not only for climate, which might seem a very distant thing for many, but also for the health of the environment and the well-being of people right here and now. There's a lot of win-win with the crisis of climate and environmental degradation, that with enough public buy-in and care and advocacy can really help to realize the benefits with the kind of opportunities that people have been calling for so long. Thank you. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, James. And I saw your hand, Marlies. We'll come to you after, but first, let's address James's question. Thank you. Again, just jump in, Mapi or Angie.
So I think is for starters is for you to create a network of media where you send information around the issues. So if there are any development, there are any issues, send, because I know my practice is that I keep these things, and often we get to touch on the issues of climate change and the impact if there's flooding happening. So if we're rolling on floods, immediately there, you must know that you send different institutions actually send a list. These are experts who can speak on this subject. So it's not going to be the subject that get to be tackled out of nowhere. So it would often get amplified around COP time. It will often amplified around your science week. It will be amplified if we are dealing with natural disasters. And you need to know that what is the conversation that's supposed to be taking place before the national disaster. Have that conversation ready so that if there's a hook, because in news, we look for a news hook. So there's a news hook, there is a foot and mouth disease, or farmers are losing their crop because of like foreign species or whatever. If there is a news hook, make sure that you load the system with information that explain why what is happening and what should happen. So I would say that's the most easier way, is to be very wired on what is happening and why, and when those things happen, you have your information that is ready, because it's not like now, if you were to release for the next 2 days or 3 days, if you were to release a statement about climate change, when everybody's watching Paulo Sullivan or they're watching Mhlangu, if you likely you'd get
They're not
something
going
over
to
the
see
weekend,
it.
they're not going to see it. But if suddenly there is weather alert that is happening and people are reading about weather alert, it's where you send something to the media, because already they are thinking about that story, they're thinking about that issue. So it's the issue of timing, it's the issue of actually being wired about conversation that are taking place within the nation. So timing is very important, because sometimes these things are released on all times. I would say that there's always a build-up content that is done before COP. So around those key moments, your science week, environmental days. So you build up along these days, because we always need a news hook in order to do something.
Can I just
So-
follow up and ask, Angie, maybe, okay, let me give you a chance, and I have a follow-up question, unless you might be answering
Sure.
it.
If I can just add quickly for James. So in having trained journalists for a long time, but it's not my main job, but I do love it. One of the techniques that I would use in training our own, that I'd be willing to share, is, have you heard? Did you know? And that's the kind of question I'd be asking myself, because immediately when I'm doing, have you heard? That's the one in parenthesis. What follows next? Is it, as Mapi was saying, the timing? Do they need to know right now? Do they need to know tomorrow, or can they wait a little bit? So it's not only understanding the lay of the land, what's going on globally, the politics is dominating at the moment and probably crushing stuff that really matters. But it's some technique. So I agree, be wired, but ask yourself, do you have a burning desire to share this? What's the thing that you would share with your loved ones, your lover, your partner, your kids, over drinks in a pub, at dinner? Often, that which you share is the stuff that everyone wants to know about and should know about. To come to the weather, we have a very interesting phenomenon. Among the stories that our audience, and they're multilingual and they're diverse, rich and poor across the country and the world, they love weather stories. Our weather reports are like shoot through the roof. And then you've got to say, I kind of couch that we're not even getting to the climate change and the climate health aspect of it. It's weather dictates what people do and how they do it. It's the very basic thing. All of us that grew up on a diet of radio many moons ago, and still, one of the first things we'd listen to is the weather report. One of the first things when I'm getting ready is like, so what's the weather today? How hot is it going to be? How do I need to dress? Is it going to rain? That's just basic information. So weather, as one example, people tune in because it can affect their lives. But how do you take that further? How do you grow that? How do you make me fascinated and interested in beyond that, behind that, beneath that? I want to just one thing. So the mosquitoes. I don't know whose field mosquitoes are, but
The one
I've
whose
been
hand is up.
somebody's hand, Maurice. I've been
Yeah.
terribly bitten by mosquitoes, and these mozzie bites are not like normal mozzie bites. Now, I might not automatically think that there's a story because I'm not in a malaria-prone area, which is my stereotypical thinking. I'm not in Limpopo. I'm not in Mpumalanga. But why am I being bitten by mosquitoes, and actually badly bitten? I'm scratching, night and day. Is there something that among you would know that has changed because of the climate? And when are you putting your hand up and saying, people are moaning about the mozzies biting them, but they're not normal bites. How can I assist? Do they, we'll talk about flies because flies irritate us, and there'll be a phenomenon of an outbreak of flies. But the tiny little, excuse my French, shitty little mozzie, the pink prick, and then I'm scratching that I look like I've got spider bites on it. Does anyone among you know something that we should know? Put your hand up. I'm not saying necessarily now, but put your hand up. What's the phenomenon that's taking place that people can see, can hear, can think, can feel? And then how do you respond to that? How do you contribute to that? I hope that's given you a little bit of...
Thank you very much.
Thank
We'll
you.
definitely go.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll
Appreciate that.
definitely go to, thanks, James. We'll go to Marlies next, definitely, but I did just want to ask, James was asking how can we prevent the doom scrolling, and I just wanted to ask, sort of add a little section to that question as well. It's sort of unfortunate, therefore, that climate is only ever in the news when there is a crisis, when there's a flood or severe drought. Is there an opportunity for someone like James when there is this crisis, and that's the reason why his expertise is called in, for example, to kind of just throw it in that, at least something like that's why it's important for us to understand there's an impact, that climate change, even if it's not necessarily positive, i.e. the opposite of doom scrolling, but, in a sense that information empowers and can also make one feel a little bit more up. Rather than the crisis feel. Is there an opportunity then for a climatologist to throw in just a little bit more, rather not only the explanation, but help people understand that it's important to understand this link, it's important to advocate for policy acknowledgement of these issues? In other words, I want to talk to a positive angle. Yeah.
Okay. So if I may, not necessarily in audio, I mean, I know Ida tried her best to kind of separate us, Mapi and myself, into audio and visual. And actually, we're no longer doing that. Mapi's main focus might be TV, but she's also doing social media. Mine might be the background of radio, but I'm doing digital, I'm aware. So these kind of platforms merge and how we do things. So I'm just going to give you one example. There may not, minus the opportunity and the timing, there may not always be the opportunity for in-depth. But we, for example, have a website page where we would welcome an op-ed. Now, that op-ed or opinion piece doesn't necessarily have to be your traditional newspaper op-ed or opinion. You could actually also provide the photos. You could provide a, what's the audio? God, I can see the waves. An audiovisual clip. Sorry, I'm thinking of a podcast, but without the audiovisual. You could provide also some of those elements and bring to life a traditional op-ed. So there are many ways, and an op-ed is not, people might read something that is more relevant now, but it has a longer life. And if people don't read it now and they're scrolling, not necessarily doom scrolling, they could stumble upon it, and there'd be key tag words that would link a current story to a past story, an event coming up. So there are many ways to kill, not to kill the story, but to make use of opportunities.
Thanks. That's really great. And Marlies, you had a question, and then a question came up about mosquitoes. So you're on.
Oops. Am I on? Okay, hi. Thank you so much for the very, very interesting contributions there. I'm not going to talk about the mosquito because I actually have no idea why your mozzie bites might be itching more. Ida was telling me the same thing the other day. I actually had a question. One of you described yourselves as being a conduit. And my question was, how do you see your role as journalists and not just reporting action, but actually stimulating action? James spoke about hope, and in climate change, really hope comes with action. No action, no hope. And I mean, this part of this doom scrolling, and I'm a victim of real depression over mostly how little is being done. We think about other issues like the ozone hole, and there was this, or COVID, huge, heavy-handed action from our politicians, and they solved it. And ozone hole, they solved the problem, and we see sanctions, and we see all kinds of actions, heavy-handed actions over other issues, you know. And in climate change, it's this just resounding silence, and it freaks me out. And that there's, you know, this lack of response from our governments and so on. And I wanted to know, does the, you know, journalism, can you stimulate action at that level through your reporting?
So I wouldn't advocate for action. I wouldn't be the one, in a way, instigating. But move me as the journalist, the editor, the reporter on different levels. We're full human beings. I don't only respond in all my visible, obvious senses. You can appeal to my mind. You can appeal to my emotions. Radio is very good with emotions. You know, if there's a horror, thriller sound and I just block my ears in a movie or whatever, I'm not moved. And that's the importance of sound and how that locates people. But the minute I hear the sound and it's gripping music, the hairs on my arm can stand up. So you can move me in different ways, be it the mind, the intellect, the heart, the emotions, the smell, the audio sensory. You can move me.
Sorry,
it would be
when
great.
You say me, so just to clarify,
me
your journalist or the reader or the listener, the audience?
And that's why I did, in a way, talk about the conduit and the mediator. That,
okay.
In other words, I'm not. It's almost like I'm your test. I'm your first, in a way. I'm giving you an example. I'm not saying I am, but I could be the first recipient of your message, the first recipient of your discovery. So it's a very good test. Mm-hmm. It may land, it may crash, it may fall, it may rise. It's a good barometer, thermometer, whatever the case is. So you, me, I'm using them both in the sense of the individual, but also the collective. I can't use you as the stereotype and the only scientist, but working with you, engaging with you would give me a sense, knowing that people are different and have different strengths and weaknesses. So I personally, I mean, I've done public service journalism my whole life. I would never advocate for someone to do something, but through my stories, the way they would resonate, the way they're told, because I wouldn't want to be forced to do something, you know, just like down my throat or whatever. But give me enough information, give me enough reasons to reason, to rationalize. I will then move to protest, to lobby, to I don't know, stop the president in his track in government. So there's a difference also between advocacy and journalism. And some don't get it right, some mix it, but that's just who I am. I wouldn't want someone to be shoving something down my throat and forcing me to think and feel and react in a certain way. I want enough information, quality information, that I'm able, from enough sources, diverse enough, that I'm able to make up my own mind and say, enough already. Now I'm standing up. This, whether it's the water or the lack of funding for science and research, enough already. But I would want us to have enough information from a plurality of voices and views so that the audience can make up their own minds, because they're not governed by the same prescripts, principles, ethics that we are. And that's why I use the word, we're the conduit and the mediator in a way. A great storyteller, news storyteller, is not about me. It's not about the flamboyant anchor or presenter. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, call me old-fashioned. I'm merely rowing the boat. Everyone is the passenger. The newsmaker is the passenger. The audience is the passenger. But I need everyone to row with me. I can't be rowing in one direction and everyone else is rowing in a different direction. I'm telling one story, but the reality is somewhere else. Those are just some examples. So what makes you passionate? Why do you care about it? Remember, that's what I kind of said earlier. So think about why you're passionate about what you do. Why should you share it? How will it better serve the public, the citizenry, the world, society, the advancement of humanity, including science.
Thanks, Mapi.
So, I mean, I don't know. I have a slightly different philosophy. For me, when I decided to come back to news, partly was that notion that we have always said we are conduits and we are not making deliberate choices of what to amplify and not amplify. The word is as it is because lower hanging fruits, and we took a decision that those who are populist, we just give them platform without starting to ask yourself, how is this information that we putting to the people relevant in giving them necessary information needed in order to be informed citizen? I think, I will tell you, I'm very deliberate about politics. I do not follow politicians around going on a campaign train. I'm very deliberate. I always tell the newsroom that that's the waste of resources because here is someone, and we're not going to get a chance to challenge that. They're going to promote people that are going to have water. They can solve Johannesburg water crisis, which is something that will take 20 years. So that doesn't interest me. It interests me to tell people why what is happening, why we have a collapsed municipal systems, because certain decisions were made and the country decide, and how people, the information that they need in order to make decisions, because once we just say we are conduits and we are not actively selecting which information is where to put there or not, I think it's a fallacy for us that as journalists that we've always had. The reason that a lot of people get platform on journalism is because they have powers to do so. They can send us press releases, and often an ordinary person with issues, without those resources, those issues do not come. So the issues of the well-heeled tend to get more airtime. I think everybody's going berserk because Midrand doesn't have water. For Christ's sake, there are villages that have not had water, and we are deliberate because part of us live in Midrand to amplify that as if it's a big story and the whole world is falling apart. So I do think that we perhaps depended on saying that we're going to use the information in there. We can't be deliberate in terms of what information is worth taking on. Right now, my biggest bugbear now is the fight, for example, over MK, because it's popular party, it's popular. But I do not think that the kind of blanket coverage that we do to a biggest trend in politics does anything for the viewer. I think it fascinates us, but what are the daily agencies of South Africa? And I think if you say climate change is a big agency because you're going to have a house and you're going to have an insurance that you don't know if that insurance covers that. I think for me, that is urgent because ultimately, that is so what to the well-being of the people. So I do think that we need to strike the balance, but there is something to be done about us who have an opportunity to read, to say what is important, mixing between doing what is news, because people have managed to send us press release and people have managed to whisper to us. And what are conversations that are not taking place that should be taking place? So that's how I view it. When I do the diary, I say, okay, you've got all the court cases and everything, but what should I be talking about that is not there in the platform? That someone is dying for me to hide, because if people know about this, they'll be more informed and they will make better choices. So I just think that we need to strike balance. I think sometimes it's a cough up on us saying we can't make those decisions in how we make news choices and selection that say, yes, it's great that Cyril is going to this pastor, but and so what for someone who's not in Eastern Cape? Should I be doing a story that would affect people?
Sorry, Ida, can I just quickly clarify?
Yes.
So, please don't misunderstand my use of the word conduit or mediate. For me, it is a channel. I'm the channel. And my responsibility is to get all the relevant, correct, accurate information, all the voices, the counterpoints to that, and mediate that conversation. But I'm not the kind of journalist or editor that should get in the way. I need to get out. It's like I need to conduct the orchestra and the choir as an editor, producer, journalist. But at some point, I must find all the relevant bits, find the relevant dots, help the audience connect those relevant dots. But I'm not the expert in everything. But at some point, I must get out of the way. That's what I meant, by conduit. It's very deliberate, but it's not about me. It's about me guiding or rowing the boat and steering it, then to allow others to make up their own minds with hopefully the right, accurate, correct information. Sorry, and then just one, the story about following the politicians, it would be a waste of resources, true, but the story lies in how politicians at a certain time, and I mean, we're just going to give you a heads up now, watch what the politicians, especially those in government, are doing right now with state resources. It's an election year. They're going to do the schools have opened. Kids maybe are still not placed in schools, but they're going to deliver school shoes on the 10th of February in a village in the Eastern Cape. For what? They're using government resources to do party politics. That's the story that's about resources, using the front or incumbency. I'm just using that as one example. So would we follow every single politician? No. But what are they doing with public resources that are not benefiting the public for their own personal political gain? And that could happen in science, in the science field as well, for example.
Well, I think it's very well argued by you both, and that you both actually have a nuanced position of your position. And by the way, for those in the Climate Health Story Project, this debate is just about the most common debate in journalism circles. To what extent is the conductor of the orchestra really steering and setting the agenda, or to what extent is that conduit a bit more, may I say, a bit more passive, and being the one, ensuring that this good mix emerges from the orchestra, or the different voices coming from the audience. And that is a very, very, it's an ongoing debate in journalism circles. And I know you have both presented nuanced versions of it, but I think it's great that we actually had those different views here. And Ntando, I know that you have a question. Let's just go to Ntando next. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and Mapi, thank you very much. I think there's just so much to take around this, and I think to an extent, to just like some smaller extent, as in my role, I'm using some crazy things in I hope they can. I think this idea of which I think we had at the beginning about the pain on jargon, use of jargon, and not being able to say things. And my role as somebody who stands between research, which is the science, and communities in whatever form, or any other stakeholders, it's just one of the things that I sort of deal with, on a daily basis. And one of the things I'm very much interested in, which I think I'm really taking and I've heard over and over again, is just this idea of using sound bites. And I'm wondering in my mind, do you really train to use these sound bites? And what does it really take without sounding cheesy, and using stories that are just, just out of, in bad taste sometimes. And in fact, one of the things that we've experienced, especially, and I think this covers quite a number of things in terms of who the stories we really like to tell about the role of science in health, and I think, and who tells that story, especially in the context of South Africa, because I think that becomes one of the very important things about who tells that story. And in my context in clinical research, a lot of scientists, are white scientists, but a lot of infectious diseases or non-communicable diseases are really led by white researchers. And how do we strike that balance in terms of being able to tell the story? Because, Mapi, as you say, we eventually hear, I mean, in my field of HIV prevention research, there are just 2 or 3 scientists that we'll hear from and not really hearing the rest of the story. So that's one question that I have. But another thing, I'm really interested to hear from both of you about, I think, on this idea of being a vehicle to ensure that, be it for advocacy, it's for raising awareness or whatever the case might be, what are some of the health issues that, to your point, Angie, that you are also people, what are some of the health issues that you really are passionate about, and how have you heard those stories from researchers or scientists being told, and what could be made different? I mean, what could be said differently? And just my last remark is just about the idea of making things interested in the midst of water crisis, in the midst of foot and mouth disease. But, how do I come in and tell something that, in our field, we believe is very exciting, that suddenly now we are testing a product that you can take only once a year to prevent HIV. And it's very exciting for us. But I think one of the things that you mentioned is that, scientists tend to be very excited about these things, and that, everybody else is just worried about other, important things. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Go ahead. Those are such thought-provoking questions.
Yeah, I'll take 2 of them. The whole issue about the frequent use of very same voices. I think that's a problem. We don't get enough plurality of voices. But again, it also speaks to some of the caliber of scientists that we have and the communication and ability of their PR behind them. These, like, someone automatically, no one thought, oh man, this is a big research. Let me get somebody else that is involved in the research. But we all went for Glenda. What is Glenda? Glenda Gray. But also, I think at some stage, some of these scientists who have occupy the space, they need to be a little bit generous. If they have colleagues who are coming up, they need to say, I'm not available to do the interview, and this person can do the interview. But yes, we are guilty that automatically we look for Stellenbosch, because Stellenbosch PR always sent us the list of scientists. So the role of PR department in your research institution that you are associated with is very important, because they are the one who should be monitoring what is happening, and they're the one who knows your skill set and should be positioning you for, if you need commentators. I keep on using SONA as an example. It's SONA time. If you want to use commentators on climate change, the president has just come up with a new climate commission members. If you want someone to comment on that, what should be happening, what should president do with that, I have these names available. So there's that. This was one question that I recall in terms of how we do that. And, in terms of just most of them being English speakers, I remember I did work for Solidarity when we were dealing with COVID. It was very difficult to get people who could explain COVID in mother tongue languages, but we had to go and find the institution. They are there. It's just sometimes, but there was money behind that, trying to find those people who can speak those languages. So we had enough time to go to universities and phone universities and say, don't you have someone who can be speaker? And we trained the people. Once they identified that, oh, these people are not used doing the interviews, we then trained them so that they can communicate around it. So not enough is being done. And, people also who feel that what they are doing is important and needs to be known, they do tend to go to some form of media training. so that they get advice on how to speak in sound bites. It's not possible to speak in sound bites while you're doing the pre-interview, but once you know what the other person is looking for, it's easier then to summarize that, whatever you're saying, and do into sound bite. But I would say if you can, do invest in some form of media training, because that is very important. And it brings back to the question, what if this is too much? You just want to be scientist. And I would say a society deprived of information is bound to make mistakes. We have what we have now in the world because we had a society that was just listening to sound bites from one man, which was Donald Trump. And he framed the entire narrative because he knew why it's important to frame the narrative and occupy that voice. And I think good men, people who have read, who have information, they just need to be as aggressive as being part of the conversation as possible, because we are purer if you guys don't self-train, if you guys don't invest in sharing what you're learning.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. We only have 13 minutes left, and I know that King, Nomfundo, and Tali likely have questions as well. So thank you so much. There's King. Over to you. And by the way, sorry, King, before you go, sorry, I just want to make sure that Nomfundo gets to respond, talk a little bit about water, because there's been so much mention of water today. Yeah, but go ahead, King.
Okay, thank you very much, so Angie and Mapi. I've really been following very interestingly here, and to be honest, because I'm in front of my computer and it's connected, I quickly went and Googled to read who is who and who is doing what. I just like what Mapi said now. However, I also want to mention that in as much as some people, some scientists want to go for media training, I, for one, I started media training probably 2019. I've done a couple of them. But there is a reality which can only be overcome from the journalist's point of view. Not only from the journalist's point of view, but from both sides, in the sense that the PR of institutions, right? In as much as they say they will give you the list and everything, there is internal politics that occur, so that they have specific people that they always send, because they have a certain image that they want to protect. They have a certain narrative they want to give, and at times they have things they want to cover, so they wouldn't put someone out that may not speak in favor of that. Letting that one aside, it's difficult, therefore, to say someone, let's take a young scientist that is coming up, right? That has a real story, that really has something to pass. But because the person is not at that rank, that doesn't have that image that portrays the university strongly, the person doesn't come in as PR, through the PR list. When this person contacts you as the journalist, now that person is not in the list that you have received from Stellenbosch, for example. If at all the journalist could just do a small background check. Today, everything is over the internet. I'm going to give you an example. I was applying for something in China, and the guys told me, send me your CV. No, they said, no, send me a recommendation letter. I sent a recommendation letter. And when I asked them, what about the rest of the form? They said, no, everything was on the internet, so we filled the form. So they had complete information about who I was based on what I had out there. So if at some point the journalist can also just take that extra pain to who is this person? But this person has not been sent to me by the PR list. Who is this person? And just try to do a small background check. Maybe give them a call to listen to them a little bit. They might get a different narrative which is not usually out there. That's just, I am saying so from a personal experience. It has not happened once, it has not happened twice, but I've seen it happening a couple of times. So please, while they push towards you, also just push a little bit to find who that person is. Thank you.
I believe.
Mapi, do you want to go before you go?
Yes.
No. I mean, I think I say this as if it's an excuse. I told Angie yesterday that I was shocked. I knew that there was a lot that was wrong with our newsroom, but I didn't know how deep. And I can tell you, yes, that's what they must do, and they have all the time. But we're suffering from this phenomenon of 2Ks who know too much, they don't want to listen. And so, it's a miss and hit. Some people you'll give them guidance as a producer, go on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn people, then you'll find people views and follow people on LinkedIn, because how people present themselves in LinkedIn, you might find interesting. They do small introduction about what they are doing. And they will tell you, you ask them in interviews, who are your favorite columnists or scientists? They wouldn't be able to tell you. They will tell you with people who are on TikTok. So we do have a challenge in terms of that kind of curiosity that says, I have said to them, there are reporters that I take out of the data. I said, can we just go and check what universities are working on? And after the week, they come out empty-handed, because that's hard work. It involves reading. So it's the ease, and we're trying. I don't want to say it's my biggest frustrating to say, just go and look at master students, look at what they are studying, look at PhD students, look at what they're studying, because that's where you're going to find new interesting voices. But it's work in progress. So I can't tell you the journalists that we were and the journalists that we have found now in the system. For me, it's two different things. And there are really good ones who are coming in with law background, who are reading, and you can see them. But those that are not good are too much. Supposed to, we've got a lot of people who shouldn't be in the business, but it's also because we're not paying anymore as well. So
if I may just quickly, just quickly to King's point, because I know Mapi has to leave. I'm not sure about the others. So every institution has their politics, be it the universities, be it the newsrooms, be whatever. It's a world phenomenon. How do we all work around the politics of where we work, and in your case, science, academia, institutions, organizations? Young scientists, I would love to hear from young scientists. I mean, we know that women constitute more than half of the world's population. In South Africa, probably Africa, we know that, give or take, half to 3/4 of the population is young. But also they need to walk the walk. I think this thing about, sorry to go back to, and it's not a dig or anything at Newsroom or SABC, the live TV phenomenon and the social media. It's also, it's very easy to create the celebrity scientist. And it's the same with the celebrity TV journalist or the celebrity radio. It's a little bit more difficult for radio to be a celebrity radio journalist unless you're an anchor of a program. Generally, people don't know what you look like. Now they've got all the tools to figure out who you are, and depending on how you work the network, work the circuit. So I would also just be cautious about creating celebrity scientists, but some of the celebrity scientists, if they do it really well, I'd be fascinated watching, listening to great science told differently. But it's a human phenomenon. It's the strength and the weakness of being a human being, and what feeds our ego, what feeds our mind, what feeds our emotions. So
Angie,
that's just
thank you for that. I'm going to quickly ask, we actually have 5 minutes left, and I really would like to hear from Nomfundo, but now Mapi is going. Could you all turn your cameras on? We would really like to have a screenshot of just everybody on the call. Unfortunately, Charlie had to leave, and James early, but at least for those who are there. So we can have one of those nice pictures that funders like. As you know.
Camera is facing the ceiling.
Nomfundo, can you put your camera? Could you put more? Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And I know Rose is probably taking a nice picture now. I know you have to go, Mapi.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My CEO is traveling and I need her to sign on something. And she says she can see me now at 5:30. That's why I'm going.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time, Mapi. Thank you so much. I think we have a few more minutes left. And Nomfundo, you've heard so much mention of water issues. I mean, what are the thoughts that came to your mind in terms of, this relationship between newsrooms and scientists like yourself about, how their water story can be told better? I mean, I was just wondering, this that to me it sounded like the start of a real collaboration.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation, getting everyone together. It was very interesting for me as a young scientist starting in knowledge translation and communication. I'm just thinking about the instance of actually picking back on issues that are current in South Africa, such as the flooding. So, for instance, in our unit, Prof. Karadi Wright, she's in the climate and health research program. She spoke about flooding and climate, and she spoke about the effects of flooding, like waterborne diseases. And she actually spoke about this last week, which was at the peak of the flooding season in Mpumalanga and Limpopo. I think that will be very helpful for us as scientists to actually piggyback on these issues um, moving forward. And also to speak about Mapi's point of translating science into your mother tongue, which was quite interesting and very important in my part. Speaking about water issues and waterborne diseases and how to better use our water sources in my mother tongue, which are, yeah.
So if I may, just to the point of language, it's a critical one. So it's not only the timing thing is you need to be ready because it's the disaster that's going to make the news. It's not the quiet time that's going to make the news. And how do you prep yourself and get ready? But it's not getting ready quietly. That's why I'm saying these platforms exist. It's what are you actively doing to socialize, familiarize yourself and the audience, be it through newsrooms, for when that time comes, when that phone call comes, it comes generally once in a lifetime, but to languages. So at SABC, we pride ourselves that we broadcast in, and I'm not talking about Channel Africa because they're not part of the news team, although they are part of the SABC and radio team, but I'm going to just confine myself to news. We broadcast in 13 languages. Pedi, Tsonga, Venda, Swati, English, Afrikaans, Ndebele, Tswana, Sotho, Zulu, Xhosa, two San languages, one of which is still not written, Kwedam and Kuntali. That's what we do every day. So it's one of our strengths and it's one of our edges. But can you imagine if I find science generally difficult? I don't know everything. Can you imagine how much more, and they're not less bright, less intelligent, but maybe they don't have the words, maybe they don't have the vocab. And some languages to a greater degree, lesser degree. I'll give you an example, and this is just something to think about of how do you contribute to the jargon of science language, which I would say is a must, because you're building up this knowledge base of how we communicate in other languages besides English. So recently, I think it was through Arts, Culture and Sport, that ministry, they have language experts, and with public funding, they organized and invited some of our team members and others to a language workshop. It was held in Witbank, which I think is Emalahleni now. But they focused specifically on Ndebele, isiNdebele, and IT, the language of IT. So the language of science, the language of IT, it's complicated. And one of our colleagues was invited, and I said, off you can go, but when you come back, you're going to share the information, you're going to conscientize our teams, and hopefully it's going to get... They worked through an A to Z glossary. They were asked what the words mean, what the right word is, how you describe that. They had conversations, they changed words, they upped words, tweaked it, what have you. that language development of science, IT, we're going to AI, is really, really important. We're finding even now with the audience and our journalists is they might be Zulu or Xhosa speaking, but actually they can't string a word or two together. So we're losing that capacity for people to speak in their own language. But we have this public mandate responsibility to communicate to people in their mother tongues. So do think about it. What is your expertise? You could do a social media card, whether you do it for yourself, the institution that you work for, the organization, and share that and say, we've been pondering, we haven't had the right word for, let's pretend it's climate change. What's the climate change dictionary? Have words changed? Why are they changing? Is it more nuanced now? Has it become easier to grasp? And that's another form of how you can communicate. So it's not necessarily in the discovery and the research that you're doing, but science and the need for science to be explained in own language is critical.
Thank you.
And if I may add, I know we need to end soon. Thank you so much for that, Nomfundo and Angie. Sometimes it's not necessarily about the word, because it could be that in Zulu you could continue to say climate change, English language words, but sometimes in finding a term, a better description can blossom, because it could be a longer sentence. Even I'm Afrikaans speaking, my home language is Afrikaans. I can't think I've ever used the word klimaatverandering. I don't think I have, because I speak of climate change. So it's not necessarily always the actual word, but like thinking of ways to describe things that really resonates with people, because sometimes there might not be a term, I feel, but if you disagree, please say. I know that we need to wrap up, and if there's a burning question, we have obviously have everybody's contact details. I can connect you. I really hope you want to and will connect with one another. And to say, yeah, that is it for this In Conversation with Journalists, with Editors. And this kind of conversation and the Climate Health Story Project is supported by the Wellcome Trust, to which we're very thankful. And very thankful to all of you for this. And it was just such a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Mapi, who's gone, and Angie, and to all of you on the call. It was wonderful. Thank you.